All right, thanks, Rick. As Helen and Rick indicated, we're going to have a look at the Osborne Atlas first up. As Rick suggested, there should be you should have gotten yesterday, I think, the PDF document and the Geoscience Analyst project off those dongles that were lurking around. And we're going to do an exercise at the end, essentially alteration mapping exercise down one of the drill holes at Coulthor. So there should be some A4 sheets that look like this with a drill log and some place to put on some notes, etc. on the table. So if you want to grab one of them, we'll get onto that exercise a bit later. What I should say, I guess, first is that the Atlas it's a compilation of information, and whilst we try and put all that information into context, it's a compilation of information rather than a reinterpretation or anything on those lines. We've tried to be relatively agnostic where possible in terms of genetic models, etc. Simply because if you go down that route, you'll be arguing all day. And essentially, what we want to do is allow people to, if they have a drill hole into a system, say, does this look like Osborne? Does this look like Eloise? Does this look like Ernest Henry, etc. So it's all about being able to identify that you are potentially in a mineralising system when you have some drilling. So with that, it's mainly compilation. So I should acknowledge a lot of the sources in the Osborne and Coulthor Atlas are obviously Chinova, who have been incredibly generous with their data. So that what we've put into both the PDF Atlas and the Science Analyst package is a lot of material from Chinova, obviously material from GSQ here where available, regional geophysics, etc., and also a lot of reports. We've used Greg Morrison's work at Coulthor extensively. We've used the material from the Deep Mining Queensland report that came out in 2017 rather extensively, and various other reports that are referenced in the Atlas. So I guess many of you have probably seen some of the atlases that have come out to date, which include Mount Isa, both the copper and the lead zinc, Ernest Henry, the Cannington, Maroon and Pegmont Atlas, and then chapter 6 is the Osborne Coulthor chapter, and then Eloise is going to be chapter 7, which we'll talk about a bit later. So we've tried to stick to a common enough structure, I guess, for the Atlas chapters in terms of looking at the size of the deposit, where it's located, etc., what the host rocks are, mining method, etc., and then step into more the halo, the halo information, focused on particularly on the alteration assemblages and the structural styles, the geophysical signatures and the geochemical signatures of those halos. Geochemistry, of course, when you're looking at Osborne and Eloise, certainly surface geochemistry is a bit more is a bit lean on, simply because it's tough to get through that cover sequence. So with that, look, you'll all have these PDF documents in front of you, but I'll scroll through this one very briefly so that we can have a look through it. So firstly, look, we've covered the regional geology. We've tried to put in a plot of where the not everybody's entirely familiar with northwest Queensland. That you can see Osborne down in the south here, and there's a bunch of other deposits, most of which are going to be covered in, or they have been covered in previous, or will be covered in subsequent Atlas chapters. We've included some geophysical data. Certainly, in terms of the eastern succession, the Cannington, Pegmont, and Maroon Atlas had a lot more information than the Osborne chapter does about the regional geology, the deformation history of the eastern fold belt, etc. So we've been a bit lean on that in the Osborne chapter, on the basis that all of that material is available in the Cannington Atlas. So what we've done is try to give people a bit of an overview of the deposit, particularly the geometry, and I think what you'll see later on when you look at the Geoscience Analyst package is that a lot of this program is all about context. And for example, you read papers or you read theses, etc., and they talk about analyses they've done and samples they've done, etc., etc. They may mention, for example, at Osborne, oh, it came from the eastern lode, it came from the western lode, etc. But I certainly find it's not until you actually put it in context and look at it in detail and see where those samples came from, for example, relative to the ore zones and the hanging wall and the footwall and etc., that you really start to appreciate what the story might be and what that data might be telling you. So this is the Osborne deposit. It's essentially it's complex structurally, which impacted significantly on its early discovery history that we'll have a look at a bit later. There was a lot of drilling happen. It had some great geophysical signatures, but a lot of drilling had to happen before there were the serious high-grade intersections that basically confirmed that it was going to be an economic deposit. Which those intersections had to be pretty good, back in the 80s and 90s. So their ideas of economic mineralisation back then were a lot different to what we have today. So it's an open pit or an underground operation. It's scheduled to wind up operation this year in 2019. Unfortunately, it's a relatively thin set of chutes dominated by ore body 1, which is what you see heading right down to depth in the blue zone in this diagram, which was back in July 2000. That material was all inferred at that stage, but now it's basically been, obviously converted to measured before it was mined, I assume. So that's the plunging chute. We'll have a look a bit more at the structure of that in a minute. We've included the resources and reserves, obviously, at the deposits. It's sometimes a bit difficult. When you look at the history of deposits and try and track back through all the information to understand what a pre-discovery resource was, but I think we've got some reasonable numbers from Osborne and Coolthor, which are in the atlas here. Osborne's been mined out. Coolthor had a small, short period. I think it was only about 2 years of mining before it was put on hold. I presume because it was uneconomic. When you look at the grades of Coolthor, which you'll be able to do in the exercise we do this afternoon with Geoscience Analyst, you'll see it was a bit lower grade than I was imagining, and in general it's lower grade, I think, than the Osborne deposit itself, which is probably why it was only mined for 2 years. Now we've sourced a lot of information from Deep Mining Queensland study. So, for example, this is the geological interpretation by Mark Hinman under that study. He's done a great job. I presume some of you at least, or most of you, might have seen the work he's done throughout the Eastern Succession, where he essentially stood back and took a view through the time slices, not only with the stratigraphy but also with the structure, and he took the structures that were mapped, obviously, but he spent a lot of work on the regional aeromagnetic data. And he's mapped out a lot of additional structural detail. So in this diagram, you can see that he's put on the D1. Well, it's not on the legend. Oh yeah, he's up the top. D1, D2, D3 faults, and then there's a bit more information in the Geoscience Analyst package. And so Osborne sort of sits in this kink in what they've interpreted as an early D4 fault. And Coolthor over between a couple of D2 faults over there further to the west. It's all undercover, obviously, but Mark was able to track some of the. Fortunately, the rock units had a magnetic marker unit. I'm not sure which unit it was in, but you can see that he's been able to use that to map out the stratigraphy undercover and infer some more structural information from that zone. And then we have a quick look at the mineralisation, which I won't go into in detail. Neil Adshead did a great job in his early work at Osborne. was one of those classic theses of those days. I think it was '95. It was finalised where you had one guy go in there. He did a reasonable structural job. He looked at the fluid inclusions. He did some stable isotopes and that whole suite of work to do the first early work at a deposit, including the mineral paragenesis and mapping the alteration and everything. So he's really good job. So it's that's well done. It's obviously been refined throughout the time, mainly through the work of consultants, and some of them you'll see referenced in this report. What we've also done is taken the Deep Mining Queensland 3D geology. So this is a snapshot from the Geoscience Analyst package that you have on your machines now, and you'll see when you get that Geoscience Analyst package out that these faults that have been interpreted into 3D actually they're based on that interpretation that Mark Hinman did of the regional geology from the geophysics. So he's done a pretty nice. A great job, I think. And what we'll also have a look at in that package later this afternoon is you'll see on this diagram that there are the granites here in yellow, and they were essentially came out. There's not a lot of granite outcropping. Well, there's none in the immediate vicinity of Osborne. There are some small outcrops out to the northwest, maybe 5, 10, 15 kilometres, I'm not sure. But what happened under the DMQ study was that there was some of you may know more about it than I do, but there was an inversion done basically of the regional gravity data in terms of trying to map out in 3D the extent and depth of the Williams-Narraku batholith suite. And that was all part of a targeting exercise where the Williams-Narraku was one phase of the prospectivity analysis. So that's been included in the package. We've taken the petrophysical information that we could get. Most of it is actually based on the work of Jim Austin at CSIRO. He's if you're not familiar with his work, he and John Walsh and various others at CSIRO went through a lot of the deposits in northwest Queensland, and it's mainly published in a report I think called Uncover Cloncurry, and he took a lot of samples, up to I think there's probably about 30 in the Geoscience Analyst package from Osborne and Coulter, and you've seen his work. He's drilled. I think there are about 20 millimetre cores out of those samples. They were all oriented when he collected them, and he's measured the density, the magnetic susceptibility, the remnant magnetisation, and various other petrophysical properties, as well as the same samples were run through the TEMA so that you actually get the mineralogy of that sample. So it's quite nice the Geoscience Analyst package when you have a look at it later during the exercise. You essentially can be seeing the rocks on 3 scales. So you see them at the drill hole scale. And then you see them at the hand specimen scale for some of the holes where there are highly detailed photos available from when the high lugger was run over various holes. And then associated, the same holes were used by Jim Austin and John Walsh. And so there are various samples down those holes where you can see what it's almost a thin section type view of the mineralogy. So it's for the holes where that data is available, it's a really interesting exercise. We've looked at so you can see here the outer halo and the inner halo. We've tried to characterise them. They're not so clear at Osborne. There was certainly, if Greg's here, Greg Morrison's here, you might be able to talk to him about it. He's done a lot of work there. But essentially there was a phase of alteration that was calc-silicate alteration was one part of it. It was interpreted by ADSHEAD as being pre-mineralisation. But it based on partly, I guess, was it Louis Gautier that published the early dates from rhenium, osmium, molybdenite dates, and he actually interpreted the calc-silicate alteration there as a skarn and broadly synchronous with mineralisation. But so there's some early alteration. But the key outer halo for the deposit, from what I can gather from looking at all the work, it's Nick Oliver was talking about the albite halo around the Ernest Henry deposit, and it sounds, it's broadly similar. What you see at Osborne is an albite halo around the deposit, I think up to sort of 500 metres out from the deposit. We put some information in here from the structural studies that have been done at Osborne. Some pretty detailed work. We've taken most of the information that was available for us was by King. He published an internal report which Chinova's allowed us to use in 2001 and come up with a pretty complex model. It is a complex structural story. It's essentially, when Nick was talking, the structural setting at Ernest Henry reminded me a little bit in that at Osborne I think it's also a case where you have a bend in 2 and 3 dimensions in the fault, and its activation on those faults. And as you'll see from these diagrams, King interprets a change in your stress direction as being one of the key reasons that you've localised mineralisation in the dilatant zone. Here's a table with the petrological features. So that in the early days, ADZ broke up the deposit into what he called the Western Domain and the Eastern Domain, and ADZ came up with some interesting conclusions, I guess, that the Western Domain was more dominated by pyrite rather than pyrrhotite, and that the copper to gold ratios were much more biased towards the gold in the Western Domain. And then when you step over to the Eastern Domain, it was much more dominated by pyrrhotite as your iron sulfide, and it was much higher copper to gold ratios. So that was sort of interesting, and partly on the basis of that and various other parts of the mineralogy, he interpreted, I don't know whether it was ADZ who interpreted it or not, but somebody at some stage had interpreted a fault called the Awesome Fault, which basically separates the Western and Eastern domains, which when you start looking at the later data, and particularly as mining progressed a bit deeper, it's a bit harder to find what actually happens to that fault. So it may not be the large principal fault that was at first envisaged. So after the geology, we've had a bit of a look through the geophysical expression. So we've tried to collate the data, magnetic and gravity data that was completed over the deposit, and that's all included in the Geoscience Analyst Atlas. There was a great compilation of the geophysical signature of the deposit itself put together for deep mining Queensland, with gravity, electrical methods, magnetics and various other methods put together. So those diagrams are both in the PDF copy of the Atlas and the Geoscience Analyst package. We've looked at, before I get onto the exploration geochemistry, so this is the generalised story of the deposit here. So these diagrams are taken from Tulliman, who I think must have been the geologist at the mine for quite a long while. He published this paper in 2001, I think it was. And the story as published by Tulliman seems relatively simple, in that you have these ironstones that you can see up there in the striped white. Then you have the silica flooding in the purple and the ore in the yellow. So they're basically the three key elements of the mineralising system. Whether or not certainly the silica flooding and the ore, from what all workers seem to be in agreement on that was broadly synchronous, the ore and the silica flooding, and whether the ironstones, I think there's general consensus that they were a bit earlier. And what you'll see in this section as well is the ultramafic unit. This is I think in more detail it's termed a peridotite. So that sits up in the northern part of the deposit, just in the hanging wall to the eastern domain mineralisation. So as you head south in the deposit, you start to. We only have 2 sections here. All 3 of them must be in the Geoscience Analyst package, but there are various kinks and bends in those ironstones and shear zones that you'll see in the Geoscience Analyst package. There's the paragenetic sequence from ADZ. You can peruse that at your leisure. So you can see that ADZ actually termed the precursor rock types. So not only the lithological stratigraphic rock types, the feldspathic sammites, the banded ironstone, but he also, for example, here termed the calc-silicates and the metasomatic phlogopite biotite schist as precursor rock types to the main mineralisation. So the geochemistry, we've looked at the various data sets that were available. There was a lot of work done, particularly by Louisa Lawrence on the cover sequence. I don't know whether that was done as part of CRC LEAM or not, but it was around that era, I think. And also Rutherford did some work out there. There was shown that, including I think it was called Syra gas sampling and various other techniques were run over the top of the deposit. And there were sort of sniffs of the mineralisation in that work. There was some analysis. I think it was Louisa Lawrence who did that of the drilling through the cover into the basement. So she was essentially looking at what is the metal anomalism in the whatever it is, 40 odd metres of Mesozoic material over the top of the deposit, and those diagrams are in the Geoscience Analyst package. They've been taken from the excellent geochemical toolkit that you may have seen that's come out from the DNRME last year, I think, with Keith Hannon as the lead author, I think. So we'll see that, and obviously the other geochemistry that happened at okay, it must be further down the page, but the other geochemistry that happened, we'll get onto in a minute when the diagrams come up, is the basement geochemistry. So essentially what happened was during Osborne's life, there was, we all do it, I guess. You step out from your mineralisation and you're undercover and you say, well, we've done our geophysical techniques, we've got some targets, but let's be a bit more systematic about it. So that there was an air core program run to basement over the area, and that's when the Coolthor deposit was drilled out. So we'll have a look at that in a minute. There's a diagram for the geochemistry. So we've ripped a lot of material out of the publications, obviously from the early days of the discovery, and then here is the set of images from deep mining Queensland that came out in 2017, I think. So you'll see that Osborne itself has is part of a very strong magnetic complex. It had a strong EM, ground EM signature as well. You'll see that there's from this image down to the bottom here that there's a subtle. This is the Falcon data. So you see that there's on the left in the centre here is the Falcon data. So there's a subtle airborne gravity signature, and then I think D is the ground gravity as well. So it's rather prominent in both the magnetic and the gravity data. These two down the bottom, these are all in the Geoscience Analyst package, are the airborne EM, I think. That's the Falcon data and some of the early geophysics. What we'll have a look at is part of the discovery history in geophysics was intimately involved with that, and we have a couple of diagrams on the next page. So you'll see that this is a summary page of the ground EM. I think it was moving loop EM. Yep. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it was moving loop and ground magnetic survey. So these were the original data sets so the regional mag was used to focus in on this magnetic system, and then there was some ground surveying completed. And you'll see from the top diagram that's the ground EM. There were basically two large or joined anomalies that came out, one in the north and one in the south, and that was broadly echoed in the ground mag, which you'll see on the south. There were two anomalies. Initial drilling, from what I can gather, tend to focus in the southern area, and as you'll see once you open up the Geoscience Analyst, is that the plunging curved ore body was that this northern anomaly here basically sits on top of the ore body where the open pit ended up being, and then the ore body plunges away to the southeast, and so that larger EM anomaly you'll see is essentially sitting over the down plunge extent of that's ore body 1 and 2 there. So that the early drilling was targeting that more strong EM system to the south, and those holes were basically almost clipping just over the top and just getting the top of the plunging system. So there's a bit more geophysical information there. This is the geochemistry from Rutherford et al. And this is basically looking at the element concentrations in the cover sequence. So you can see that there was some iron anomalism. There was gold anomalism, but you can see gold greater than 2 ppb, so very low level. Some copper and various other elements you can peruse at your leisure there. So that was sort of the surface and cover expression. This is the Syrah gas traverses over the top of the deposit, which appear to delineate the mineralisation. You look at copper there; seems to directly overlie the mineralisation. Geochronology. That's included. I couldn't determine where the geochronology samples came from, so they are not included in the geoscience analyst package. But essentially, there's a cluster of two parts to the geochronology. There's the mid 1500s geochronology, and then there is sort of the 1590, 1600 dates, which I think are typically interpreted as the metamorphic dates or D2 dates, and the later dates are mineralisation. But there is still contention about that, of course, so I won't go into that. And then we've put a brief history of the discovery method as well, so that Osborne was basically interested in that area. It passed the property passed through various companies, but the interest was basically came about based on discovery of those earlier zinc-lead deposits further up to the north. Then the airborne mag was flown, and the system was delineated. Then the groundwork started, and then the drilling. And it's interesting in reading through the main public documentation of the deposit is Adshead wrote a short paper for the 1998 edition of the Australian Ore Deposits published by the AusIMM, and in that Adshead notes that the discovery hole NQ29 was drilled and intersected 32 metres at 5.8 copper and 3.2 gold. So based on that public description of the deposit, that seems to have been what was considered the high-grade discovery hole, hole number 29. Let's see. Okay, here are the diagrams of the top of base or the end of hole assays, copper and gold from the air core drilling. So you can see that that drilling has delineated clearly both the Osborne system and the Coulthard system in copper and in gold as well. We've included some cross sections that have been kindly provided by Chinova, and also we didn't have a lot of detailed core photography. But Chinova has kindly supplied us with their copy of their set of photos that they had been using in their core logging with their specific rock types, etc. This is a nice summary. This diagram, it's essentially showing the from footwall through the ore into the hanging wall, so that in the footwall it's predominantly Semitic rock. You'll see there. And then you get into the ore and the host rocks to the ore, the immediate host rocks, and then you get into the hanging wall up to the hanging wall above the mineralisation, which is noted here as predominantly Granophel's rocks. One of the points that's often been made about Osborne, and it's led to the terminology. I don't know what if it's an acronym. It's called they call it the PIP, and it's essentially the concept that you've had a couple of shear zones. The footwall and the hanging wall, and that the zone in the middle has acted has not been deformed quite as much, and potentially acted as a competent block. But there's a lot of discussion about that PIP concept as well from various different people. But basically, what you see, and you can see that in this set of rocks here is that you've got all these migmatites pegmatites and migmatite, etc., in the hanging wall and the footwall, and then you look at those sammites and unmineralised ironstone and recrystallised peelite that sit in the central zone that hosts the ore, and they appear to be a bit less